converting a position where you are much better from the opening is not always an easy task. This is a problem that my commenter has, and I think is still a problem for a lot of people, even for me sometimes. So basically what he said is that he plays the Ponziani, and sometimes the opponent goes out of theory and plays wide lines, and he gets a much better or even close to winning position from the opening, but he doesn't know how to convert the game and loses all the advantage. So in order to give you an idea, like, give me a second, the Ponziani is this. So basically is a position where you play e4, e5, and then you play knight c3, knight on c6, and you play the move c3. Now c3 is not the best move because it can be punished with move like knight on f6 or d5, so counter-attacking in the center. But if the opponent plays bishop c5, it can be punished pretty well because now the move c3 does make a ton of sense. So basically what happens is that you play the move d4, they have to take, the bishop gives a check and you play knight c3, and as you can see, you already have a pretty good position, you have to stamp pawn in the center and you are controlling a lot of space, so technically you are already much better. But how can you convert this position? So, give me a second. Now, I am not a Ponziani player, but I play the Spanish a lot, and sometimes I can get similar position because black can play the move bishop c5 anyway, and the positions are pretty similar, or arguably a bit better, I would say, in the Spanish. So I went through all of my Spanish games that I won, and I found a really interesting game that can help you guys to understand how you can convert a winning opening into, let's say, a win or a winning middle game. So enough talking and let's jump into the games. Here we go, this is the first game, starting with the best one, so pay attention. I'm starting with the best game because I know you guys have the attention span of 1 minute, so it's better to start with this. No, I'm just kidding, I hope you are going to be interested and watch all the video. Please give me watch time. Let's see, I play d4, and my opponent played d5, knight f3, knight c3, and bishop b5, the Spanish. And now they play bishop c5, so as you can see we get a pretty similar position. The idea is playing c3, this is the best way to punish this, because bishop c5 doesn't make a ton of sense, to be fair. This is kind of an opening mistake. You don't want to play bishop c5, you want to play, let's say, a6 and b5 first, and then you play bishop e7, knight on f6. You don't play bishop c5 for this exact reason, because I can take a ton of space in the center. So now I play d4 in order to take some space in the center, and my opponent decided to take. Now, there are two approaches to the position, I would say. Well, you could even castle, but you can push the pawn or take. Now, pushing the pawn is the best way to play this, but as you are going to see in this game, I played with different approach because I probably didn't know the best theory ever. But let's say this. It still is a pretty interesting game, and despite the fact that this wasn't the best move because you could give a check and after a block there is this, so the knight can take. The problem is that after you take, I have the move queen on e2, so it's scary. I saw this and I thought queen on e2 was enough compensation, which is what my opponent thought, and played the move bishop b6. So as I said, this game is interesting because as you see right now, this is the point where I get a winning, or let's say close to winning advantage in the opening. So let's see how can I convert this position in this case. So as you can see, this bishop is pretty good, this knight is doing his job, and the problem that my opponent has is that I can push these pawns and keep taking a ton of space. Now you don't win with space only, obviously I have to attack the king somehow, but he might lose a ton of time to defend this knight somehow. So what I did was to castle first. The best move would have been to play e5, definitely, because after you play this, there is this, and I think bishop c4 is already moved, but you could just castle or play knight c3, and after the take you have a really strong center. Although, castling is not a bad move, because I'm keeping all the tension. I might push this pawn, I might push this pawn, you don't know what I'm going to do. And it's not the best move because I allow you, I guess, to play d6. or apparently to take the pawn, but yeah, this is really scary. I wouldn't play that. And my opponent decided to castle. So at this point, I castled, I did everything in order to put my king into safety, and now it's time to attack and take space. Now I could play d5. I decided to play d5 because it looked more sensible. The fact is that if I play d5, you cannot really play knight on d4, you cannot play knight on e5. The only decent move you have is actually going back and play the move knight on e7. So instead of playing this, you could play knight on e7. Now, my opponent is not playing the best moves, but keep this in mind. We are analyzing games where the opponent doesn't play the best move, and for this reason, you have a really good opening, an advantage in the opening. And also, when you have an advantage in the opening, it means that the position is difficult for black to play in general. So they are going to make some mistakes. So this happens all the time. It's not that if you are +2 in the opening, your opponent is going to play perfectly. It doesn't work like that. So let's see how we can punish him. Now this is a mistake, and my opponent thought he was pretty clever playing this move, because you don't even have to move the knight, because if I take, you can take by bishop. What I did though, in this case, was to just move the bishop. The best move would have been to play, for example, bishop on d3, because at least you defend the pawn. But this move is not so pointless. Like, there are better moves than this, I agree. Although you have to move the knight at this point, you cannot really take this because the knight is hanging. So you have to play something like this. So what you can do in a position like this, where you have a ton of space advantage, is tend to damage your opponent's clutter and prevent your opponent's pieces to move. So the move d6 is really sensible at this point, but also the move knight c3 makes sense. Knight c3 defending the pawn, d6 is coming, you have to do something about that. So d6 is coming, so the best guy might be to move the knight, but as you can see, the best move is knight on e8. So when you get a really good position in the opening, it's going to be really difficult for your opponent to play the best move, because the position is so good that the best move is going to be a really goofy move like this, knight on e8. It doesn't make any sense. My opponent, so I want to prevent the move d6, so I had to play something like knight on g6, for example. At this point though, you allow me to take even more space, and now your pieces are really bad. So what can we do now? How can we win a +3 position like this? We have a ton of space, our pieces are much better. How can we convert the advantage? There are two really good moves, to be fair. There is d6, because after this happen, this pawn is pretty strong, this bishop is not going out anytime soon. My opponent cannot move, so we can take advantage of that and of the pawn playing this move, and they to get in with the knight and destroy our opponent, which is a more positional approach. I decided to play more aggressive and, I would say, beginner-friendly approach, which was to develop the bishop. So developing pieces in a position where you have a ton of space obviously has to be a good move, because you can start attacking your opponent, and for him it's going to be hard to defend. So the queen now is trapped, so the only move you can play is f6. And as you can see, we start damaging our opponent's clutter. We take, and after we take with the knight, this knight is pinned, and we still have the incredible move d6. What is the point of d6 again is to block this bishop. So blocking this bishop, we also block the rook. We put pressure on the bishop, we have a really strong queen after you take, and I mean, life is good. So my opponent decided in fact to take, and we take with the queen. Now this position is incredible. Apparently we gave some advantage back because there is the move bishop c7, but as you can see, bishop c7 is not a really scary move. We can definitely rev out our queen and also give a check, and this is going to be a slaughter pretty fast. He decided to play queens, and I played a move that it is controversial, but practically speaking it is also quite clever. So the move I decided to play was actually to take, because after I take, I get a much better endgame. Now I'm pretty good with endgames, so if I can get an endgame where I'm close to winning, I'm going to accept that. Now this is not the best way to convert a position, obviously there are many ways, but I think I'm playing in the most practical ways. So before saying you could have played better, that's true. Keep in mind I'm not a super grandmaster, and keep in mind the way I'm playing is pretty logical, so I think you could find this idea too. It's not a really deep computer lines or really tactical stuff. What I'm doing is that I'm damaging your structure like this. You could have taken with the rook, but that probably loses everything. And after this happens, I'm also going to say not only your structure is really bad, I have really scrum pieces. Because at this point, it's good that we have the same material, but this bishop is attacked and it is a terrible bishop. If you play this, there is this, by the way. Your pawns are pretty weak and you cannot really move. So this was my point, and I thought I was pretty clever playing a move like this. So what I did at this point was to play knight on b6. As you can see, this knight is a monster, is attacking the rook, and is attacking the bishop, and it is also attacking the pawn. So my idea made a lot of sense, because again, it wasn't the best move, but practically speaking, it was really hard for my opponent to defend. So if your opponent has an hard position, they are usually going to make mistakes. So I decided to take. If you take, there is a fork. I decided to play this move, which is pointless because we can still take the piece, and it is basically a fork because you have to take, otherwise you lose a full piece. So this was the position where my opponent resigned. So as you can see, I converted my space advantage into a position where I had really healthy pieces. My opponent had to damage his structure. I made the right plates, and I decided to get into a much better endgame that I converted with this. So this is a way to take advantage of an opening where you are much better. Let's see the game 2. So still Spanish, same stuff. They play bishop c5, and we get a similar position. Now there is obviously a difference. There isn't the knight on f6, the knight is on e7, which is even worse. So now we don't have problems with the pawn in the center. We can easily block with the knight, and the difference this time is that the bishop is on b4 instead of b6. Our opponent decides to attack the bishop, and we slide the bishop back into a better position. Now we play bishop b5 to put pressure on the knight, but the knight is not pinned. The knight is also defended by the knight on e7, so depending on the position, obviously playing bishop c4 is much better. It does make a lot more sense, because now we put a lot of pressure on the king's side. He played the move b5, which is not best move ever, doesn't make a ton of sense, so we can just go back, and you give us the opportunity to play a4 in the future, so this is just a weakness you gave me. Now he played the move d6, it's time to punish our opponent, and I found the best move, which is knight on g5. Knight on g5, it is really logical and also pretty aggressive. The point is that we are attacking this pawn 2 times, and if you castle, man, you shouldn't really castle in a position like this. You could play, for example, the move d5, although the problem with the move d5 is that not only you lose a pawn, but your knight is also under attack. Now you're attacking the bishop, which is pretty sensible, and now I decided to play the move queen on f3. Now this wasn't the best move. Once again, the best move was to play d6. The idea is that after you take, we can take this probably, although I wasn't sure about this move because you can take with check. So what is the idea? Let me check this real quick. You take. Oh, there is queen takes on b3. Okay, I totally missed this. But even though I missed this, I played queen on f3, which is still a pretty good move. It's not super clear how you can defend a position like this. And now d6 comes. Now d6 works. Not because I threatening to win the knight, and also keep in mind that you can win the bishop, but because I can just win the rook. The full rook. So queen on f3, as you see, wasn't that bad of a move. And instead of taking the rook, in this case, since it didn't take our bishop, we have 3 attackers on the f-pawn. So instead of winning a rook, I decided that going for the king was a much more clever solution. So I decided to play this. He decided to take, which obviously is a terrible move. I think he thought that he could have defended this position with knight on g8, but after they gave a check, you play this. This is checkmate. So in this case, I converted my advantage with a really aggressive move that I was able to play only because I had a ton of space in the center. So this is a way to convert your advantage. Let's see the third game. So still same stuff, but as you see, the position differs all the time, because I mean, your opponent can play really wild moves sometimes, but this is good for the content, because as you can see, these are different situations where I'm much better in the opening, and I can show you how to take advantage of this. So my opponent decided to play the move b6 because you are basically anticipating the move d4. It is not the stupidest move ever, I have to say. D4 comes anyway. D4 comes anyway because I'm just taking a ton of space, which is always a good thing, as you saw. At this point, my thought process was, this pawn is attacked 2 times, is defended 2 times, but one defender is actually removable, so I decided to take the knight and to take the pawn. So now I converted this position in the fastest way possible. I'm up a pawn in the opening. So this is another way to convert the position. Okay, my opponent decided to take, so not up a pawn anymore. I'm just winning the position pretty much, because after they play rook on e1, if you move the knight, the red discovery is on the queen. Let's say you play d5, this is coming. I cannot play this because you can actually take. The pawn will be pinned. So I guess, again, I could play a move like this, but looks pretty terrible. Also, d5 is not easy to see. It's not easy to see this idea that you can take the knight because the pawn will be pinned after f3. And my opponent decided to play the most human and logical move, which is f5. The problem of f5 is that you lose the position instantly, not because I can play the move f3, but because now you weakened all of this diagonal. Usually keep in mind, if you have to play f6, f5, the position is lost. So queen on h5, giving a check. If you block with the pawn, there is the really common sacrifice, so I could take with the knight. If you take, you lose the rook. And instead of playing this, my opponent decided to move the king. Now we have 2 moves. We could take this way and winning the knight, or we could still give a check. You have to take, we win the rook, and we also win the knight. Like, we win everything at this point. There isn't too much to see. I converted my advantage in 2 seconds, and it was a pretty easy win. The conversion might be interesting, I have to say. Like, I'm up a ton of material, but let's see how you can actually convert this position into a winning endgame. As you see, I'm playing as many pieces as possible. This is the best way to convert the endgame. I'm just developing pieces because I want to avoid any, dumb stuff. And at this point, I played a really clever move. Knight on c4, attacking the rook. My opponent decided to play rook on c2. The problem of rook on c2 is that you have to trade pieces. You're forced to. So rook a on c1, you cannot move the rook anywhere because otherwise you lose it. You just have to trade pieces, and at this point, I guess everyone can win a position like this. If you're scared of this pawn at a certain point, you could sacrifice the knight in order to win both of them. This might be an idea, but I don't think it is necessary at all. So that's it for today, guys. I hope this video was helpful. If you have any video ideas or you want to ask something or say something about the video, please let me know in the comment. And I'll see you soon with the next video.